Hello, hello, it's me, Arden Lee. I'm back today with another video, and today I want to talk about whether healing is a linear or non-linear process. If you have been following some social media accounts that talk about healing or personal growth, you may have seen that very popular illustration where you have it says healing is not a linear process, and you have a dot over here and you have a line, and that line goes in a whole bunch of squiggles and circles and twists round and round till it finally lands at its apparent destination, where perhaps in the metaphor it is healed, but it takes a lot of twists and turns to get there. So we're going to talk a little bit about what that means, how true it is, and we're going to unpack all the thoughts and sentiments behind that. Before we get started, if you are not already familiar, I am Arden Lee. I am the creator of the Repatterning Project, which is an 8-week course along with an online community. And if you want to learn more about that, you can go into the description box below. You're going to find a link to a free PDF download about the repatterning modality. And you're also going to find a link to the Facebook group, the Repatterning Parlor, which I've created as a community for like-minded individuals who are all seeking to optimize our success and happiness through our beliefs and our empowered creation of our realities around us. So do go ahead and check that out. So let's talk about what it means for something to be a linear process. Now, when I saw that illustration, and of course this is a very popular thing for people to say nowadays, healing is not linear. And I believe that it's really meant in a way that is incredibly well-intentioned in regard to the reality that going through a trauma healing process, or any healing process really, means bringing up a lot of stuff, and that for a little while it's possibly going to feel pretty awful. It's not going to feel immediately satisfying. It's not going to feel like you can see the road ahead of you that clearly. It's not like you're going to be able to just say, okay, well, here's my roadmap and here's all my destinations, and I'm going on a straight line from point A to point B, and I can see everything in front of me and predict how everything is going to go. If you could see everything in front of you and predict how everything is going to go, then you'd be healed already, because to know something, to really know something in a manner that is consistent and sustainable, takes that body knowledge, correct? We can have a breakthrough or whatever, we can have an insight, but if it passes us, if it doesn't stick, then it's not really doing its work on ourselves and our emotional systems in order to implement the changes that would be necessary, right? So essentially, if you can see something well enough to know that that's, where you're going, oftentimes that's the first step to integrating it. And certainly all of those things take steps along the way. But the main point is that if you knew already who you would be when you were healed, it would be so much easier to be that already. The real kicker with healing, and what makes it difficult in many scenarios, is that the traumas or the conditioning that we are trying to release ourselves from often limits our viewpoint of what is possible and what is available to us, and what we might be if we got all of that back, if we got all of our original our sort of like our factory settings back, if we got everything back to how we feel within our hearts. This is why we do so much inner child work on the journey, right? We go back to what we have already known about ourselves to be true before the world came along and conditioned us to conform, and our parents came along and told us that we were either good or bad if we did certain things one way and certain things another way, before our peers came along and bullied us and made us feel that we were less than in any way, before that boy or that girl rejected us, and on all this crap got piled up on us and started limiting our beliefs, not even our beliefs, but our understandings of what is possible for us, and started talking us out of our dreams. So naturally, there's going to be a lot that comes up during the healing process in order to reintegrate that. And if you were able to know it already, then in many ways you would already be healed. So understanding healing as a non-linear process is comforting when you're in it, to know that just because you can't see the road ahead of you doesn't mean that you're not doing the work and that you're not deeply engaged in the work. And if there are days that you feel awful, if there are days that you feel like your trauma is never going to go away, that you're just stuck in the muck of it, this idea that healing is a non-linear process is there to offer some comfort, because it's saying, hey, you're not just going to immediately feel a little bit better and a little bit better every day that you wake up. Some days you're going to wake up and you're going to be really in the muck of all the stuff that you are trying to release. Healing is by nature a process of detoxification, a process of release and letting go of all the things that no longer serve us. So in order to purge something, it has to be brought up. That's why even with physical detoxes, you get detox symptoms. You get whether that's, from your skin, getting breakouts or acne or whatever, or having symptoms of, when you're releasing toxins, your system is purging them, right? So it's not always pleasant. And it's the same thing with spiritual toxins or belief toxins. They have to come up, and it's not necessary to relive our trauma. It's not necessary for us to, just push ourselves back down into that mud. But often it is necessary, in my experience, to acknowledge what happened, even if it's just for the purpose of saying, wow, that happened to me and that hurt, and it wasn't okay what happened to me. It wasn't all right. And in the future, I am going to know that when this happens, it's not my fault. It's no reflection on me whatsoever. And I'm going to be able to heal this without taking on all of the crap or all of the shame that society puts on me for having something like this happen to me in the first place, right? That's really the thing about trauma that is so insidious. It's not just what happens in the moment to you that you need to, get over or whatever. It's not just that pain, but it's the beliefs that trauma can instill in you about yourself. Because if something like that could happen to you, especially if you're a child and you're trying to make sense of the world, then it's easy to believe, well, it was my fault, or, I deserve this in some way. I brought this on myself. Even when, especially when we deal with women in sexual assault situations, which is one of the wounds that we are healing across the collective consciousness right now. We absolutely have conditioned women to believe that it's their responsibility to prevent themselves from being assaulted. And that's why women talk about, carrying their keys between their fingers, or, all the precautions that they're sharing now that they take on a collective level, where they walk at night, where they park their car, all the things that they do going out of their way to not be assaulted. Well, what is all that saying to them? It's saying that if they did get assaulted, then maybe they didn't do something on that checklist and somehow they brought it on themselves. So my point behind this is that even throughout our adulthood, we are so susceptible to taking on the shame and blame for our traumas that it's necessary when those things come up for us not to relive them and not to, go back into all the pain of that we suffered and experienced. But it's necessary for us to look at what happened, acknowledge what happened. At least it's certainly in my experience with the modalities that I've used for my own healing, to look at what happened and say, okay, I understand why, I understand all the circumstances that led to that, and it wasn't my fault, and I'm still deserving of love, and I'm still a worthy human being, and this other person who hurt me was very much responsible for their actions toward me. I may be responsible for taking care of myself and cleaning up my own, like if someone comes over and vandalizes my house, I'm still responsible for cleaning up my house, because we don't currently live in a system where people who vandalize houses are mandated to go and clean up the mess that they've made. And I mean that, both I mean that literally and metaphorically, of course. So naturally, things may come up that may not be pleasant, and I believe that ultimately that is what people are talking about when they say that healing is not a linear process. But I want to also emphasize the way in which healing can be linear, and in that sense, what I mean is that it's really on us as we're undoing all of our patterns and all of the ways that we behave as a result of our negative programming and negative conditioning, all the things that we have allowed in the past, all the things, all the ways in which we have compromised ourselves in order to survive that we've taken on as habit. Essentially, we want to look at those patterns and we want to hold ourselves to, because it's not going to be useful to us if we're just like, oh, well, healing is not a linear process, so I'm just going to go all over the place and, and not stay accountable to myself, to my improvement. I'm just going to, well, I'm in the midst of my healing, I'm just in the muck and I'm just going to roll around in it because this is the best that I can expect. That's the trap. That's the shadow side of the saying that healing is not a linear process, because ideally things should get better and better over time, not necessarily in regards to the way that you're waking up and feeling about your healing process every day, because that is something that can change very easily depending on the triggers that get brought up in you and the work that you're doing on yourself. But ideally, in the patterns that you are living under and the beliefs that you're carrying, you should, ideally be able to, this is what I tried to hold myself to anyway. I held myself to, like, okay, if I see myself going down that same path of behavior before, naturally forming a new habit is not the easiest thing in the world and it takes time. So I'm going to forgive myself if I go down that path. But what I'm going to aim for is I'm going to try to cut it back a little bit each time, so that each time I sense that I'm doing that again, that I'm engaged in one of my old negative patterns, one of those sets of behavior that isn't serving me, that I can notice it, and hopefully each time I can stop it a little bit shorter than the last time. And in that way, I can make my healing process, not linear perhaps, but I can chart my progress over it. And there was an instance that happened to me maybe like a year and a half ago or so, and I fell into one of my old patterns of seeking approval, seeking like romantic or sexual approval from someone who was really not not necessarily invested in my well-being and was not conducting their relationships with integrity. And I noticed myself kind of competing for attention, or and I was and at the time, without going into details, I noticed what I was doing and I was like, it's fine, it'll just be like, it's just like the old days, it's just me getting up to my old tricks again, like I used to back in New York or whatever. And then I kind of just knew in my body, I was like, I'm just gonna hold off, like I'm gonna stay in this situation, but I'm really not going to attach myself to any outcome. I'm just going to kind of see what happens. And sure enough, the way things turned out was really not awful, and I saw really marked improvement in my choices. But I also noticed some choices where I sort of slipped up and I started feeling bad about myself. So I was like, okay, I see what happened. And I was like, I see what I did to my body in this situation. I didn't even like have sex with anyone. It was like, but my body was like, my body was so sensitive at that point from like going into that process and being so raw and so sensitive from all the healing work that I was doing, that my body was like, even responding to, like flirting or flirtatious touch or whatever, my body was like, whoa, what are you doing with us right now? Like, whose care did you just hand us into? Because wow, are they gonna be around? Are they gonna be taking good care of your feelings and your emotions? And I was like, no, probably not. Sorry about that, body. And I ended up working it all out, and returning to my center and returning to being like, wow, no, if I was gonna go to a place like that, I should have I really need to make sure that someone is going to be in integrity with their word and with the way that they act with me and the way that they act with other people, and I need to make sure that that they're willing to, you know, to be accountable in like the most very tiniest and basic of ways, you know. So my point behind telling that story was, certainly I had a moment where I almost, you know, slipped back into an old pattern of mine. But what was really great was that I noticed it, and I just put the brakes on, you know, what I was doing. I was just like, I'm just gonna kind of relax and let whatever happens happen, or whatever. I'm gonna stop striving for something. I'm gonna stop driving this car down this road and just kind of like, I'm just gonna chill out and like see what's around here. And sure enough, I was like, okay, that was, you know, that was good that I was kind of able to stop it before it went too far. And knowing that I was able to stop it, I was able to see all the choices that had led me to that course of action in the first place and what had happened. And I was like, okay, I feel like next time something like that starts happening, I'm going to be able to stop it even sooner and even sooner and even sooner and even sooner. So I like holding myself to that as a linear process. Again, if I fuck up, of course I'm going to forgive myself. You know, it's not about perfection. It never is. It never is about perfection. But that gives me like a light at the end of the tunnel, like, you know, that gives me a way to look at my healing and not feel completely lost in the dark. It gives me a way to orient myself, because if you're on that line and you're just like all over the place with your feelings, it can feel like you're never going to get to a place where things are better. And so I like using that as a way to track my progress and to say, every time I start to slip into one of my old patterns, my old behaviors that I know are no longer serving me, am I able each time it happens to stop it a little bit sooner? Because that is a way that I'm seeing progress that I can measure, that makes me feel good about myself. So in that sense, I have my emotions that are completely non-linear all over the place, because anything could come up on any given day and I could feel any way about it. And then I also have, you know, my progress over time, which I'm like, every time that something comes up like this, it gets a little better and a little better, and that gives me hope. So is healing a linear process? No. And sometimes also, hopefully, yes. So it's whatever works for you. But I know for me, that framework has been really helpful. So I hope you enjoyed this and got something out of it, and I will see you in the next video.